Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to this Local Pension Board meeting. We'll start off with apologies for absence. From looking around the room, it looks like we have all Local Pension Board members here, but do we have any other apologies from anybody else? I don't believe so. No? Okay, we'll go on to the second item, which is emergency evacuation procedure, which I'll pass over to Angie for that one.
Hi, we're not due to have a fire alarm this morning, so if the alarm does sound, then you exit through the doors here, down the stairs and congregate in the front, but it will be a follow me because I can lead anyone who's unfamiliar with the building.
Thank you. On to the next item, which is public access requests. We haven't received any in advance, so we'll move swiftly on to the next item, which is Chair's business. So there's a few things I've just mentioned. Some of this is reasonably standard material at the moment. The first one is just to say that we are recording this meeting and we're limiting attendance still because of the continual prevalence of COVID-19. And also the second bit of that is just I would like to welcome our new scheme member representatives, which are Councillor Steve Smith and Andrew Verney. We'd also like to give thanks to the previous members, which are Councillor Windows and Brown, and wish them all the best for the future. Next point I'll just mention, which I probably will mention at every board meeting, is just to remind everybody, including anybody who's watching this video, of the purpose of the board. The purpose of the board is not as a decision-making body. It is there to support Avon Fire Authority and to help it achieve compliance, and also to help it deliver efficient and effective administration. For the benefit of everybody who is watching from an alternative location, at this point we can just go around and do introductions of everybody in the room. We'll go around this way. I'll start with myself. So I'm Andy Cunningham, I'm the Chair of the Local Pension Board.
Good morning, I'm Angie Feeney, I'm the Director of Corporate Services at Avon Fire and Rescue Service.
Good morning, I'm Steve Smith, Councillor on Bristol City Council for Westbury and Tremont and Henleys.
Good morning, I'm Andrew Varney, a councillor also on Bristol City Council for Brislington West.
Morning, Steve Greavy, I'm an employee representative for the scheme.
Mark Jacobson, also Avon employee representative for the scheme.
Good morning, Jeff Cleek, Pensions Manager, Avon Pension Fund.
Good morning, Anna Capp, Avon Pension Fund.
Okay, thank you all. Next point would just be to advise about the approach to any voting which will take place. So in terms of the voting order, we go with votes against first, then abstentions, and then votes for. We'll only go through that process if there is a recommendation to actually vote upon. Otherwise, we'll just go to proposer and seconder. Okay, on to item 5, which is conflict of interest. I don't have the full definition of conflict of interest here, but one thing I'll just highlight here is that one thing which doesn't count as a conflict of interest, which is relevant to the member representatives, is that they're not considered conflicted by simply being members of the scheme themselves. But if anybody else has any conflict of interest regarding anything on the agenda, if they can make us aware at the appropriate point in time. Okay, on to item 6, which is minutes of the last meeting. Does anybody have any comments on the minutes? Any sort of inaccuracies or concerns about any of them? No? Okay. I wasn't going to suggest going through them, so just assume everybody has read them. One point that I was just going to make at this point before we go to propose and seconder is just regarding the process for sort of picking up actions. I did have a brief discussion with Angie beforehand because one sort of comment I made is that our minutes are including the recommendations which were covered at each paper, but sometimes there was additional actions where we were asking for information and we just I guess I just wanted some assurance that those actions were being picked up so that we could make sure that they were happening through. So I'd just pass over to you on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So we do have a separate action list for the Local Pension Board, as we do for all of our other committees, but that action list is only sent to the people who have got an action to complete. So and that was mainly me for the last one. So, but what we will do, sort of taking the point, is make sure that those actions are also included in the minutes for sort of that kind of clarity, and for you all then follow up at the next meeting as well. And we will make sure that you as chair have a copy of that action list as well going forward.
Yeah, thank you. I think my main sort of thing that I just wanted to make sure of that is that when we were picking up the actions, that they were being passed to the correct person so that they could be included within the next pack, so that we weren't missing anything when we had asked for additional information. I mean, it didn't arrive. So in terms of actually just passing the minutes, so I will propose that we pass. Does anybody we have a seconder, please? Okay, thank you. I will assume that there's no objections unless other people state otherwise. Okay, we move on to next item number 7. So we'll pass on to, I believe that's Jeff who's going to present this one.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the regulatory update for noting. So the regulatory update has been included in your papers. This gives you the position on key issues at the end of around about the end of June. There are a couple of updates to report following the issue of that paper, and they include the judicial review of the McLeod remedy. So on the 4th of July, the Fire Brigades Union and the British Medical Association were given permission to judicially review the UK government's decision to include McLeod remedy costs in the 2016 cost control valuation. Both cases will be heard together at some point in the future. If the review is successful, then arrangements will need to be made to improve the member benefits retrospectively. Clearly that will have an impact on the administration and the Fire Authority to manage. Though the case which has been raised will look at the firefighter NHS pension schemes combined, the outcome may also have an impact on the LGPS going forward, local government pension scheme going forward. Also, on the 14th of July, the DWP published its consultation response on the draft pension dashboard regulations. The LGA, Local Government Association, had made a robust response to the consultation, expressing concerns over the proposed staging date for the fire pension scheme, which was set as the 30th of April 2024, given the conflicting pressures faced by employers and administrators, and the requirement to hold value data, which at that point would not reflect remediable benefits. It also noted the difficulty in presenting data to scheme members based on different sets of benefits with different retirement dates, different retirement ages. The DWP has actually now extended by 5 months the staging deadline date for all public service schemes from the 30th of April 2024 to the 30th of September 24, which will hopefully give all concerned more time to get everything in place. And then finally, the pensions regulator had recently issued some guidance to scheme managers on steps they need to be taking to prepare for the introduction of pension dashboards. And the LGA will continue to engage with stakeholders across the sector, including fire rescue authorities and administrators and suppliers, on the evolving requirements. And just to let you know, although Avon Pension Fund hasn't had direct communication with the Fire Authority at this time, we do have dedicated resource within Avon Pension Fund to actually look at the pension dashboard situation and all the aspects around engagement, software providers, etc. So there is a lot of work going on in the background there, and at some point in time we'll be engaging directly with the Fire Authority to obviously have that conversation about how that's going to work for the firefighter pension scheme. So any questions, quite happy to take.
just mindful that because we've got several new members, I'm just wondering that people sort of familiar with the general context of the dashboard in terms of what they are, or would it be helpful to just talk well enough, or to talk through?
Limited understanding.
Okay. What about the cost cap bit of it? I just wonder if people know the background to that, or would it be worth Jeff or I just talking through that briefly?
It would be helpful if you could expand on it a little bit, please.
Okay. So in terms of where the cost cap bit came from, it was when the scheme changed. So in 2015, when the scheme changed, there was a sort of promise put in place to try and keep the cost of the scheme within a certain window. So there was a certain percentage, I don't have it to hand, of what, actually I do, it was 16.8%, which was deemed as a sort of like notional cost of the scheme to the employer. And then if the cost of that scheme went out of a certain window, which was plus or minus 2% above that, then the idea was that the scheme would be adjusted, which means things like the benefits would be adjusted, either made better or worse in kind of simple terms to bring it back within that window. So some of the context to what Jeff was talking about was some of the dispute was whether the MacLeod Sargent amendments to the scheme should be included within that calculation. So one viewpoint was that they shouldn't be. Another viewpoint was that they should be, and that was some of the debate. And then also there's probably a bit of a debate about how you include them in terms of which period of time that you do. So that cost cap provision is a sort of permanent feature of the scheme as such. So when you get to each valuation, it is looked at again. So there's always the possibility of benefits being adjusted up or down to try and keep costs within that window. So that's just a bit of an overview. I'm mindful that one, it's probably somewhat complicated, and secondly, that we've got several new members. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Jeff? Or was that?
I think you pretty much covered that off, Chair. But I think the thought was initially that if the cost cap was going to be breached, it would be breached upwards, which would cause the scheme to be revalued downwards. But the valuation across most public sector services, I think, proved that the floor was breached. Therefore, the member benefits should be improved. But obviously, that's all kind of fallen into the MacLeod Sargent situation that we're faced with. So the government were looking to offset one against the other there, but obviously that's now being challenged. So we may need to go back retrospectively, put things back into possibly how they should have been from 2016 onwards or 2017 onwards.
Yeah, so some of the complication is because you might think that these reviews would happen a little bit more timely, but because they delayed it, because the MacLeod were actually talking about the position at 2016, even though it's 2022, which makes it even more complicated if changes were made, because you're talking about backdating things over a longer period of time. It is something the government has looked at. There was a consultation about expanding that corridor so it wasn't plus or minus 2% and change it to 3% to try and limit the chances of which it would be breached. There's other more technical aspects to this, but that's probably a brief overview of it. Just one question I was going to ask was about on the MacLeod bit of it, because I know that we've spoken before at previous board meetings, we've spoken before, and the focus very much has been on immediate detriment, but I was just wondering where you are in general in terms of things like data collection, and also with things like system releases. I mean, has there been any systems releases? Because I know for the LGPS, from my other job, I know that there have been releases, but I don't know the position for firefighters and things along those lines.
So from an admin point of view, we have been pressing the Fire Authority and the payroll provider for the data that we need to actually reconcile. That has, I believe, come through now. So the work is being done in back office to kind of check through and make sure we've got all those missing service breaks and other aspects that will have an impact. As far as the software goes, I think the fire scheme is far more complex than the LGPS. and the software provider has a number of phases of release. And at the moment, we've had phase 1 and phase 2, part 1. So we're up to date with the phases that have been made available, but we're waiting, I think, phase 2, part 2, and I think there are possibly phase 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 to come through yet. It's quite a bit of outstanding sort of technical data to come through, or technical systems software support to come through. Obviously, as and when that happens, we'll keep on top of that and inform the Fire Authority accordingly. So I'm hoping that we can actually begin to have practitioner working groups, so that we can work with the Fire Authority and Bristol Payroll outside of the cycle of board meetings, to ensure that from a kind of technical point of view, we are kind of where we should be going forward. But at the moment, we are undertaking some data reconciliation back in the office to support what's in phase 1 and phase 2, part 1.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think from the board's perspective, I think it's probably more just an overview of how that work's going and how much of a risk is there. Noting obviously some of this is outside of your control, because things like you're reliant on the systems provider updating the system and things like that, but you don't have much control over. But it's probably just how much there's a risk there. I mean, obviously we know that legislation hasn't been released yet, and so some of the systems releases are a little bit of, not exactly guesswork, but there's an assumptions about exactly what the detail of the legislation is there, and some of it's probably not going to be known. And at the moment, we don't know when the legislation's going to come out. I think the government hasn't really given any clear idea of timeframes on that. Does anybody else have any further questions on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up a point. The annual allowance item on the table there, it says there's a potential burden on administration depending on the number of cases coming through. Is that something that you're seeing come through at the moment? Is this likely to have an impact?
I think it's a difficult one to quantify, because obviously the regulations have been kind of widened really to allow members to retrospectively go back, or at least the administration to be able to go back and run those sort of checks through. We haven't sort of seen anything come through as yet. We go through a cycle every year whereby we sort of pick up those members who may be facing a tax charge because of salary increase and breaching those savings sort of restrictions that the Inland Revenue have imposed. This clearly will, I mean, it's been set up really to reflect McLeod coming in and that being retrospective. So I think when we do go through the process of actual remedy for McLeod, we may find that cases are going to be coming through, and we will pick up more. But that's an unknown at the moment.
Sure. So given, obviously, we all understand the resource challenges that you're working within at the moment anyway, is that something we ought to be picking up within our risk register, or is that kind of covered anyway by a general risk of unexpected admin burden that has an impact?
I think there probably is something already on the risk register. It may be that it could be expanded. I can't tell you actually at the moment what the exact wording is on there, but
I was kind of looking in Andrew's direction for that one, to be honest.
Yeah, so we have a number of areas which relate to remedy and the admin burdens and that on the risk register. There's a specific one on McLeod Sargent, and there are also ones around kind of additional costs and admin. So I think it is included, but if once we get to that item and you look at it specifically, you think it needs to be strengthened, then very happy to add that in at that point.
Thank you.
Do we have any further questions on this item? No. Okay, this item is just for noting, so it's just we'll move on to the next one, which is Jeff again.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, again, this is the admin report commentary for noting. So generally, the administration continues to work in a hybrid environment. which means that we actually haven't got a fixed office base at the moment, although that's going to be rectified towards the end of the year. So people are mainly working from home. Work is currently underway to complete the year-end process ahead of the statutory requirement to issue active member annual benefit statements by the 31st of August. And the Bristol City Council payroll provider have submitted the data, so we've been reconciling that now. And our own financial systems team will be running an extract towards the end of this week for final checking and sign-off. The Fire Pension Scheme Active Statement Template, which is the document issued to all members, just needs to be reviewed before being circulated to Avon Fire and Rescue for clearance before that then again gets signed off and is issued to our printers for dispatch. As you'll see in the report, the deferred member statements have already been dispatched back in June. Looking at the performance of the fund, generally they remain in line with the agreed key performance indicators, although a number of retirements in this last sort of quarter, if you like, have taken longer to complete due to the nature of the particular cases, and there were particularly one or two that were extremely complex, and they sat with the fund longer to resolve than we would normally have liked. Fund is currently undergoing a number of cyber-related audits in line with the regulator's cyber security principles, and also some user education and awareness sessions. A separate report will be provided to the pension board once the audit is completed, and that's expected to be completed by the end of September. And then finally, following a recent meeting between Avon Pension Fund and the Head of Business Finance and Pensions and the Corporate Director of Avon Fire Authority, the fund served notice on the Fire Authority for the provision of third-party administration across the firefighters' pension scheme. The contract end date is planned for the 31st of March 2024, and Avon Pension Fund will work with the Fire Authority leading up to the termination date to ensure a seamless transfer to the new service provider. So I think those of you that may or may not know, but Avon Pension Fund, or historically Avon County Council, has been responsible for the provision of the pension administration for Avon Fire, certainly back to the early 70s. Obviously before then it was Bristol City Council Corporation. But I think the situation going forward is the support of the Fire Authority is no longer becoming a viable option for the administration, bearing in mind that it provides less than 1% of the overall membership, but the number of schemes to administer and the complexity is just not becoming workable for the administration. So we feel sadly that we have to kind of we have to move on and focus on the LGPS. Happy to take any questions.
Questions from anybody? I have a few, but before I go on to them, did you want to just comment on the bit about the contract?
Yeah, thank you. As Jeff says, we've had a very long-standing relationship with Baines and Avon Pension Fund in its various kind of guises for a number of years. And therefore, I think it's important to recognise and acknowledge all of the work that has been done during that kind of time together. And it is a very kind of working relationship, and I think if you can see some of the complexity around immediate detriment and the need to try and work through that complexity, which we all do in a very kind of collegiate way, working with both Baines and payroll. So do understand the decision in terms of the notice, and our thanks that also in giving that notice, Baines have been considering how difficult the transition will be for us, and in particular when we're coming up to immediate detriment and remedy, and therefore my ongoing thanks to Baines for remaining to work with us, with agreeing that date with us so that we can enable a really good change handover and transition. So my ongoing thanks to Jeff and his team.
I was going to mention this point at a later item, but I was going to suggest that for the next board meeting that the board receives a sort of update on the progress of finding a replacement administrator. The board's role, I think, is just more at a high level in terms of managing the risk rather than being actually involved in the procurement process, and certainly not involved in any decision-making aspect of it. But I was just going to request that we receive an update on that at the next meeting.
Yeah, in the risk register on the next item, it is one of the mitigations listed when I kind of talk about the decision of Avon pension funds. So it does describe that I'm already working with the procurement team to look at the timetabling for that. And so quite happy to bring that timetable back to the next kind of LPB for awareness. Obviously, we were talking to Jeff and his team around that as well. And of course, our main focus on that is ensuring that we have a long handover kind of period as possible to enable a smooth transition, in particular in this very kind of dynamic and complicated time period. So sorry, that's a long way of saying yes, that's fine, we'll bring it back to the next meeting.
Sorry, can I just say, would that be an exempt paper because of commercial sensitivity?
Yeah, it may well be, depending on what the detail is, but I would suspect it would be an exempt paper.
And in terms of just, I had a few other questions I was just going to add. With the active annual benefit statements, I know it might be a bit early to tell, but does everything seem like it would be on target for the deadline? Because I know you said you only just received my data and you were still verifying it and things like that. But do you have any concerns about that at the moment?
No, not at the moment. I think we've been backwards and forwards with the payroll provider to iron out any issues, but we are on track to issue them in advance of the 31st. Okay,
thank you. Next one I had was just around common and conditional or scheme-specific data. I believe we saw a common data at the last board meeting, but we hadn't seen a specific one. Is it something you're able, presumably you do have a measure for that because it would be included in the scheme return. It was probably just when we can see that as a board. And also probably as a secondary bit of that is whether that is something which is being used to kind of drive data quality at the moment in terms of reviewing the data, or is it being sort of run, is it something which is being run annually?
So at the moment we run through SSRS a number of reports internally to extract the data quality, both common and conditional for members. That's run primarily to report to the regulator the percentage level of accuracy of the data that we hold. So that was reported, I think, at the last board. We haven't run it since then, although the data is reviewed on an ongoing basis to ensure that it meets the standards of the regulatory requirements. We have just purchased a piece of software from the system provider, which will enable us to run those reports more consistently, I'd like to say. Through a series of sort of analytical sort of reports. And once we've done that, and we've just now got clearance from our own IT that they are now on the same platform as the software provider, that we can kind of engage and bring that program into play. So obviously when we reach the next board meeting in January, February, we'll have that information run on a different system for you.
Thank you. And so, just one more final question on retirements. I noted you said obviously there was some of the complexity which caused some of the sort of failures against the target. I'm assuming some of this was probably to do with immediate detriment as well in some of those cases, or may have been from other complexity. I was just wondering, and I appreciate you might not have this data to hand, was just whilst we know that they were failures, how far beyond were they? I mean, were they ones which just failed by a few days, or were they somewhat further beyond that?
I think one was significantly late. I think probably get on for 30 days. But that was an exceptional case, which I have to say was caused by a previous fire authority not providing the correct data. which meant we had to go back to the previous fire authority to get that information. So that was the cause of that particular issue. The other cases were not significantly or materially late, and they were a mixture of immediate detriment cases, I think, and just some sort of workforce and resource issues at our end to not be able to process them as quickly as we'd like to have done.
Okay, thank you. So I said again, this one's just for... Oh, okay, sorry.
Sorry, thank you. Jeff, just a couple of things. So in section 4.4, just about terminology, it talks about 14 deferred members having been marked as gone away. Is that simply that they've moved and we don't know their address, so we can't send them the benefit statements? Is that right?
Yeah, yes, thank you. That's quite correct. So we've got those marked up. They previously had statements returned as gone away. So unfortunately, people don't always let you know particularly when they're a deferred member. They obviously fail to let everyone know that they've moved. So we're undertaking an exercise now just to pick those up and go through a tracing agency and get their addresses so we can actually write out to them.
So we're quite confident we'll probably be able to find all of them, or well, I suppose it's impossible to know, but
that's a good point. I can't guarantee that we'll find all of them. We trace them through the agency, then we write to them to say that we've been instructed that you now live at this address. Please, can you confirm? Because we obviously don't do anything until we actually get a response from the member. It's not always that people actually want to be found. I have to say, not necessarily across the fire authority necessarily, but in the wider LGPS, there are members that we just refuse to engage. But I'm confident that we'll be able to find a good majority of them. What we do undertake when that member reaches a trigger point, as in a retirement age, we obviously will make sort of more in-depth efforts to trace that member. There are various levels of tracing that you can go through, at obviously various levels of cost to carry out.
And just a point about recruitment in Section 6, there are quite a few vacancies at the moment. I'm just wondering if that's something, do you know, that's across the board, or is it just this particular pension board that's suffering those vacancies?
No, it is sadly a kind of situation that we have across England and Wales at the moment, particularly since the pandemic. There are more options for people now to work from home, so we have lost staff who have gone to other employers who possibly remunerate them slightly higher, and they can remain working from home. So we've lost people through that. It's difficult to recruit in this environment at the moment, and I think it's a national issue. I've recently responded to the LGA, who have carried out a bit of a survey across administrators, so it's not something that is just in the southwest or with ourselves, it is nationwide.
Do we have any further questions? So I do just have one more. I know I said that was my last one, but I do have one more again, which I brought forward. This is something which is actually referred to in the next paper, but from a discussion with Angie suggested we bring up now. One of the items which we as a board are asked to make sure we've gained sufficient assurance over is that the correct contributions are being deducted, which has been made more complicated by things like immediate detriment. And I guess probably the question was about how we do that, because at the moment we don't receive any information about what checks actually take place. Obviously, from the administrative point of view, some of this, the actual deduction and probably assessment of contribution rates, I'm assuming is happening from the payroll provider. So is that, would you see it as that's where the check would happen in terms of, yeah?
Certainly not the responsibility of the administrator of the pension fund, it's the payroll provider.
Yeah. Okay, so from Angie, could we ask the payroll provider to provide us with some sort of assurance about what checks they have, and that to be brought to the board?
Yeah. Sorry, yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, could we move on to the next item, which is you, Angie?
This is a routine report which comes to the Local Pension Board to assist with your scrutiny of the governance and the administration of the firefighter pension scheme. It's for consideration and noting. I will take the report as read and therefore not go through it kind of section by section, but the key items to cover is that there have been no breaches of law reported or reportable since the last LPB. There has been one IDRP, so this is the complaints process which is built into pension schemes, which was primarily around a delay in processing an injury award payment. That was considered under our governance arrangements by a panel of the People and Culture Committee, who decided to partly uphold that IDRP with reference to an apology regarding the delay and a plan of action put in place around that. But the other aspects of that were not upheld, and the individual has been informed of their further recourse for complaint should they wish to. There's also been one request for the approval of the application of a discretion, and that discretion was in regard to repayment of pension contributions of employee and employer for a gap in service several years after the fact, with the normal arrangements in the regulations being for a 6-month time limit. That was also considered under the necessary governance arrangements by a panel of the People and Culture Committee, and that discretion, the decision was not to apply that discretion, and the individual has been informed of that and also been informed of their ability to then take that further with a complaint under the IDRP route. So my kind of position would be on that is not a high rate of IDRPs or a high rate of application for discretions. They've gone through the appropriate governance route, and there aren't sufficient links in anything there that I can bring it as a point of potential discussion or concern for action for the LPB. There's been no applications for voluntary scheme pays, and the compliance deadlines, which are at 5.16, I am advised have either been met or plans are in place to meet those ones. And obviously there's regular conversations with Avon Pension Fund, where I'm sure they would advise me if there was any difficulty with that. The risks on the scheme, as you can see, just for new members, that the pension scheme has a particular risk register which is maintained, and that then feeds into the overall corporate risk register, which also has an aspect on pensions. This risk register is regularly reviewed, and in particular because you know the current dynamic situation with immediate detriment, which makes compliance particularly complicated at the moment, because there's no clear pathway to be compliant with everything, in particular that there's no kind of legislation currently in place. So therefore, what you will see that I have updated the LPB risks number 6 and 7 and 10, and those are in respect of the implications around immediate detriment. We can go through those ones in detail if you wish, but those are the ones that I've increased. LPB 13, which is the specific one on immediate detriment, was already in the red. There have been 2 other developments which have given rise to increase in risks. You've heard that Avon Pension Fund are withdrawing their pension administration of the firefighter pension scheme from 31st of March 24, and that creates risk with reference to their transition, especially at this dynamic time. And I've also mentioned around difficulty resourcing. So I have tried to reflect that in both the risk register in terms of the scores and also the mitigation. And one of those mitigations, as we discussed earlier, is having a procurement timetable which has a sufficient handover period to ensure that there is a smooth transition between providers. The other issue which has given rise to increases in the risk register is turnover on the local pension board. I'm conscious that we have 2 new employer representatives and 1 new employee representative. I think this is your second meeting, isn't it, Mark? So he's an expert by this kind of point because he's attended one meeting. So and of course that also creates some risk from us in terms of knowledge and understanding. and therefore you will see that there are mitigations in place there to try and reduce down that risk around training, which is that we have some LGA training which I have arranged to take place this afternoon, which gives that sort of basic kind of base level. We will also record that as well, so it will be available to anyone who isn't able to attend. But also there is the importance that I've reminded within this paper of doing the toolkit process. I've put reminders there about how to find that and how to complete it. It's almost like a training needs analysis, which enables you to go through and assess where you think you are on certain aspects of pension knowledge, and if you feel that you need more on that, or your scoring indicates you need more, it then directs you to how you can get that. So I think it's a reminder to members that part of the mitigation to try and bring that knowledge and understanding risk down is the completion of that training, and for completion to be reported to the local pension board chair, which you'll see from the minutes was something that we agreed kind of at the last meeting. I also cover within this an LPB work programme. So Local Pension Board has a work programme which is the delivery of our routine reports, but also some specific projects which we either need to do or would like to do over the coming year or so. Now you'll see that those projects and work strands continue to be impacted by the high workload associated with immediate detriment and remedy and Matthews O'Brien and what will be kind of the dashboard. So there is a lot coming our way for quite limited resources. So what I always need to do is try and balance up where I put our limited resources. So you will see that some of those work programmes are then being kind of put back. You'll also see that in the report I mentioned consideration of a local pension board in autumn, in the run-up to the October Fire Authority meeting, and there are some other things happening at that time which might mean that would be useful, but I do also need to consider the work involved in a local pension board against kind of resourcing, and also the timing with Fire Authority is quite dynamic because they have made a commitment to an extraordinary meeting should the calculations be ready for immediate detriment, which I will come onto later. So I think my current position on an LPB in autumn is that it's under active consideration, but there are lots of components to determine whether that makes sense, both in terms of sequencing and timescale and resourcing. I think that those were the main points that I wanted to raise on that, Chair, but I'm quite happy, obviously, for any kind of questions or points of discussion.
Yeah, thanks. Just a process question on the training, Pete, the training analysis and then doing all the training. It's entirely in our hands and our responsibility to do that, so I will. Where are we reporting all that to? In terms of, is it going straight to Andy or via you or elsewhere to make sure that there's a central record up to date somewhere?
Yeah, I think if you can report it to Heather Macmillan, who is taking our minutes here today, because you already have her email address, then we can, through that, collate that information and inform the chair. That's probably the easiest way to do that.
Yeah, fine. So it's the initial analysis which is on here, and then dates. I've done this course, I've done that one, ticked off.
Yes, that would be great. But also, if you can let us know whether you still think there are gaps, because what we want to be able to do is then put a training programme in place, maybe working with the LGA, if you still think there's gaps or something else that you might want to hear about. So yeah, the ones that you've done with the toolkit, so what the toolkit is saying you need, when you've completed those components, and if there is anything else that you feel that you would like, either individually or a local pension board for training, so we can think about scheduling that, as I say, working with the LGA.
Yeah, perfect. And again, just simple sort of processy bit. If there's a version of the toolkit that exists as a Word document or something that we can fill in as we go along, that makes life easier if possible. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll take an action to send that on to you. I think a Word version is in the policy itself, the knowledge and understanding policy, but we'll recirculate that because I understand kind of new members wouldn't necessarily have seen it. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, just carrying on from the toolkit. So just to make sure I understand how to do it properly. So in each section there's a link. We click on the link, we read that information, and then we complete how we feel about our knowledge and our understanding. That's it, isn't it?
Yes. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so you'll see on the first section, so we're talking here just for other members, Appendix B. So there's some questions there on the first column, which is asking you questions whether you know certain things, and then you rate what your level of knowledge is. And then I would suggest that if your level of knowledge is not within the 4 and 5s, because you are local pension board members, would be that you would then click on the link there for more information and the lead through for training. So that's how it works.
And good news, I will be able to attend the LGA training session this afternoon after all. So
That's great, and thank you for advising us of that in advance, so that's good.
Any more questions? I'm just going to add something on the training bit of it. Obviously, as it was said before, if you can pass it on to me, which sounds like it would be probably more practical passing it via Heather. I mean, if for the existing members, if you have completed any training since the last meeting, again, if you can pass on that information as well, because I think it is important. It's something that we collate, just because going back to the purpose of the board is to support the fire authority with achieving compliance and being effective and efficient. And obviously, there's a certain base level of knowledge which is necessary to kind of for us to perform, for the board to work in an effective way. So again, I just sort of emphasise and encourage us to make sure we're doing that. The other point I was just going to add on training is that obviously I think doing the self-assessment is useful for us to identify gaps, because as well as asking the LGA to produce training, it is possible that there's other people who can provide training as well. And sometimes that could be delivered potentially as part of the board meeting itself, particularly if we can add a training item on there. There is some flexibility about how we do that. So just to sort of highlight that as well. But it's obviously we don't know everybody's background knowledge. We don't know quite what those gaps are, which is why it's useful people can kind of self-assess and tell us what you know and what you don't know, so that when we do training we're aiming it at the right areas rather than just training you on something you're already familiar with. Yeah, that was the main point I was going to make. I mean, I've had a discussion with Angie about the work programme as well, and acknowledge the pressures there is there in terms of resourcing. I think probably from my perspective, I think some of the probably key bits of the work plan which we'd like to see, I particularly like to see probably above some of the other ones, or probably around things around like discretions policies and to do with scheme of delegations. I think particularly for some of the more emerging type issues, I think it's probably highlighting the need of, or when there is officers making key decisions, and it being quite clear almost from the board's perspective about what that process is, from delegating down from Avon Fire Authority to an individual, and also trying to make sure that those processes are sort of agile as well. I mean, it's not the board's role to say what those should be. I think it's more just to have I think the board's role is just to make sure that it is clear what that process actually is, and more to just scrutinise it from that perspective rather than to dictate what it should be. But I think it's probably fair to say it's maybe not quite as clear as it could be at the moment in terms of some of the pensions delegations.
Yeah, in terms of the pension kind of delegations, I would say sort of if we talk about discretions, for example, it is clear. But at the moment, it's clear that they all go up to a committee of the Fire Authority. And that, of course, kind of slows down the process for decision-making for some members. But it is a balance as to, there might be some issues where it's right, in particular if there are wider implications and precedents involved, where it would still go to the Fire Authority or a committee. But there are other ones that potentially officers could take, where, of course, there would still be a complaint process up to members. So I think kind of, by and large, there is clarity, but that clarity is often operationally difficult to achieve and slows down some of the decision-making process. So it is something that has been on the work programme, and I think it is a good suggestion for the next meeting to start to add sort of some prioritisation of the work programme, and I think some I'm going to have to sort of temper my enthusiasm, I think, for some of it, and say that some of those realistically will just need to come off the work programme for now, so we can just focus on the priority ones. So I think that might be a good approach for the next kind of work programme to come into the LPB to do that kind of reprioritisation.
Okay. Any more questions? If not, I just there are 5 different recommendations here, which are the first one is note the report and its appendices. The other one's consider if you require any additional information to the 5 key scrutiny areas. I referred to one of those in the previous paper around the contributions because that was one of those areas. Any additional actions or controls around the risk register, which I think we have discussed, and then the 4th one was to do with the training, just to remind around advising on that and to note the amendments. So I don't think those need sort of passing as such because they're to do with noting and considering. So I was just going to go sort of propose and second that we note those and move on to the next one because there's 5 different ones there. So can we have a proposer, please?
Happy to propose.
Okay, thank you. Second it. Okay, thank you. And we'll move on to item 10, which is the immediate detriment verbal update.
Thank you, Chair. Giving a verbal update to this group around the decision made by the scheme manager, so the Fire Authority, on the 22nd of June 22. And I'll also update on the actions taken since that Fire Authority meeting. I am doing it verbally because the paper and also the discussion of that Fire Authority meeting are already publicly available, and I'm aware that both of the employer representatives were at that meeting and so heard the kind of paper, and also there were FBU local and regional officials at that meeting, so hence why I'm doing a verbal rather than a full rerun of the paper. So on the 22nd of June, the Fire Authority were updated on a number of key developments on the matter of immediate detriment, which were, to summarise as follows, which was a Treasury letter which had been sent to the Scheme Advisory Board, dated the 23rd of March 2022, and a National Fire Chief Council's letter which had been sent to Chief Fire Officers, dated the 25th of March. And that Treasury advisory document is published with the Fire Authority papers, should anyone sort of watching or in the room should want to reference back to that. So the Treasury letter, which had been sent to the Scheme Advisory Board, outlined more specifically the tax issues arising from processing immediate detriment cases before the legislation was in place, and as a consequence, the potentially significant financial consequences for scheme members and scheme managers, which, because of the previously reported Home Office position, would not be recoverable from government. So that document was advising further caution on processing immediate detriment cases in advance of the legislation, but recognised that the decision was for scheme managers. The NFCEC letter, so this is the National Fire Chiefs Council letter to Chief Fire Officers, reflected that Treasury letter and also gave an indication of legal advice which had been received by the National Police Chiefs Council, which is said to advise scheme managers not to implement, as there was no legal mechanism to pay without the legislation and without undue risks to members and organisation. The Fire Authority were, however, continue to be advised that this matter remains very important to pension members both past and present, and that the FBU position remains that it will pursue legal action if immediate detriment is not resolved in a timely matter. And they were also advised of the circular from the FBU, which continued to indicate that intention and that more active steps were being taken towards that. And also those a reminder to Fire Authority that the legal costs of defending those cases are also unfunded by government. So after considerable discussion and questioning, the Fire Authority's decision was a temporary pause on immediate detriment processing with immediate effect, but with the exception of 4 cases which were already in the pipeline to retire under immediate detriment between July and September. And Fire Authority, albeit that continues to have financial liability for the Fire Authority, considered that was fair and appropriate because those individuals would have been taking the decision to retire and were quite some way along that process based on the immediate detriment provision. It's a temporary pause also whilst the financial implications of resuming immediate detriment were calculated using what I call a ready reckoner, so it's kind of a spreadsheet with summary notes around it, which has been provided by the Local Government Association, and that was provided on the 20th of June 2022. And whilst that assumption spreadsheet is used to calculate the financial liabilities of adopting the full framework, which we've talked about before, is the framework developed by the LGA and the FBU, which goes beyond our current processing. We are hoping that we can also use an extract of that to calculate the costs of continuing, I suppose, unpausing our current kind of provision. But that is quite a complicated process. Fire Authority also agreed to an extraordinary meeting to reconsider the pause if the financial liabilities were clarified before then. So that was in summary, the decision of the Fire Authority and their rationale and considerations for it. Since that Fire Authority meeting, I have sent a communication out to all those in the immediate detriment group in terms of forthcoming retirees, advising them of this decision. And I have also set up a specific working group looking at those financial costings using those that LGA template. And that is with a view of going back to Fire Authority as soon as possible with what we think the financial implications are of unpausing our current provision. And as we always indicated, that was going to happen in around the autumn, to also look again at the financial implications of adopting the framework for there to be a fresh decision on that as well. So that is the work in place and where it is heading in terms of Fire Authority decisions and reconsiderations. So I think that is listed as a verbal kind of update, so I would say that's something for noting, Chair, but of course happy to take any kind of questions or comments on that.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, you've noted that the Fire Authority are likely to reconvene to reconsider the pausing should the framework be put in place. Is that the case? Should there be a successful challenge with any other fire service in the country over not paying immediate detriment to prevent any financial implications for our service?
Yeah, so I think what I do is regularly horizon scan everything that's happening in this very kind of dynamic situation, and then if there is something significant, as I did by bringing it back early to Fire Authority in June, I would bring it back again to them if there was something significant of that nature for them to consider.
How long is the pause anticipated to, you say? Is that autumn of this year, or when do you expect the information to govern whether that pause will be taken away?
So the pause was with immediate effect, so that was 23rd of June, and because we've then said that we're dealing with the 4 up until the end of September, it is up until the end of September or beginning of October, with the next Fire Authority meeting, I think, is on like the 2nd of October. So that's the window of the current pause. However, as they said, they are happy to do an extraordinary Fire Authority meeting if we have the financial implications before that. But the working group are just actually at that early stages of trying to look through these highly complicated spreadsheets at the moment to try and not only calculate the cost of the framework adoption, but try and extract that to say, well, what's the cost of continuing what we're doing at the moment, which is kind of an extract of the framework. You'll recall that what we're doing at the moment is just forthcoming retirees and lump sum and annual only. So hopefully that helps in terms of your timescales there, Mark.
Do we have an idea of how many people may be affected between now and that pause, in the sense of how many people may challenge that decision and the cost and risk of that against continuing, if that makes sense, as in, is it 10, 20, 30 people that may take legal action?
In terms of the numbers who we thought might be able to retire under immediate detriment within that window, those figures were in the Fire Authority reports. I think we anticipated that it could be around 10, but those people hadn't put in their notice yet to retire under immediate detriment, and remembering they need to give 3 months, that's kind of why it was on balance the 4. However, I am conscious that we already have some risk of legal claim because we're not processing everyone under immediate detriment.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That clarifies.
Do we have any further questions on this item? Okay, as it was just a 2-note item, we'll move on to the next one, which was the draft annual report, which I will briefly present. So I just highlight just a few points from this, nothing particularly major here, but this is the second annual report of the Local Pension Board. Its purpose is largely to provide an overview of work during the year, so everything within it is publicly accessible information already, but it's more just pulling it together into one place so that it's easier to read and to analyse, and also to allow Avon Fire Authority to have an overview of the work which is undertaken by the board during the year. It's a best practice item more than a statutory one as such, and there's no significant changes to the structure of this report to the previous one. As I said, I wasn't going to go through the report itself, mainly for the reasons I've just stated in terms of its context. So, but happy to take any questions on any of the contents. Okay, in terms of the recommendations themselves, so one of them was to consider the report, which obviously we should have done, and the second one was just to approve its presentation to the next Fire Authority by me. As we're making a decision on that, I will just ask for a vote on that, unless anybody's got any questions. Yeah.
Propose.
Okay. Okay, so if no objections, then no. Okay. That's passed. Okay, we move on to the next item, which is just any other business. I don't have any. Does anybody have anything else they want to raise? No? Okay. And then it's moving to date for the next meeting, which is the 26th of January 2023 at headquarters. Assuming that, I think that date may have been, was it the first time we announced that date, or was that known in advance? Just I'm thinking about being quorate and things like that. In terms
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's been set in people's diaries. Yeah.
Okay, so, yes.
Can I just check the location? When you say headquarters, you mean in Portishead?
Yes.
Or here? Portishead, thank you.
Yes. So at Portishead. I mean, we do need all board members there, so if that date is an issue, if you can let Angie or Heather know plenty of time in advance, that would be helpful. Okay, that's the end of the meeting. So thank you very much for your attendance and for your questions. Okay, thank you.